Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of A Mic on the Podium with me, Michael Seal. Today, I conduct a conversation with a conductor who won the 2005 Besançon competition. Since then, he's been assistant and then resident conductor with the Los Angeles Philharmonic and had title positions with orchestras in Spain, Switzerland, and his native France. It's a great pleasure to welcome Lionel Bringuier. Lionel, lovely to see you and speak to you and meet you. How are you?
Hello, Mike. I'm very fine, thank you. I'm in London this week.
Yes, you're in quarantine at the moment, aren't you? Before you conduct the LPO, is that correct?
Yes, and I'm very excited because I've conducted all the other London orchestras, LSO, Philharmonia, BBC, and Royal Philharmonic, and now my debut with LPO.
So it was nice to be able to catch you in quarantine with nothing better to do than to chat to me about your life as a conductor, which is great.
Exactly, that's why I'm happy also to participate. I have a lot of time.
Brilliant. With everybody, Lionel, I go right back to the beginning, and I think I know that you're a cellist, and you come from a family of musicians in Nice. How did music first come into your life? I'm assuming it was always there, but why the cello and why then?
Yes, exactly. I come from a musical family of musicians. My parents don't play an instrument, but they love music. And I am the fourth child on 5, and my elder sister started piano, and then all the other kids followed because there was a piano at home. So we all played piano. And the cello, I always loved it. I always loved the sound. I would always recognize the instrument. And so I really always said I want to play the cello. So I played piano and cello.
And what age were you when you started the cello?
4 and a half, something like that.
Oh wow, really early.
I had a very small cello.
I was going to say the cello would be bigger than the person playing it.
Yes.
And so, at what stage did you think that music might be something that you would turn into your life, your career, your vocation?
All my life.
All your life, yeah.
Without a doubt, really. There was a teacher of French literature, but at the elementary school, and she's a friend of my family. So we still see her, and she likes to remind us that when I was 8 years old, and the teacher says, "What do you want to do later?" And I wrote a cellist, conductor, and composer. And finally, I am now only conducting.
Well, it's amazing. It's funnily enough, I was 50 recently, and my mother and father put together a book of stories I wrote when I was a child. And most of them were about being a footballer or about being a cricketer or something sporty. It wasn't music for me until I was 15. So I'm assuming you were going to concerts, orchestra concerts and recitals. And did you play in youth orchestras when you were playing the cello and before you went to conservatoire?
No, actually, I played in the conservatoire. There was a student orchestra in Nice and then in Paris. Yes, it was always a great joy to make music, to play in the orchestra. I always loved it.
Yeah. So I'm intrigued to know at what stage did you decide to put into practice? You just said at 8 you wanted to be a cellist, a conductor, and a composer. When did conducting really first come into your life, actually doing it? I mean, it's different saying that you want to do it when you're 8. It's the same. I wanted to be captain of England football team, but it was never going to happen. But when did it?
It's very different.
When did it come into your life?
When I was 13, I entered Paris Conservatoire as a cellist, and there was a class of initiation to conducting.
Yeah,
and because there are many options to add when you enter the class of cello, you have to do also many other things. And I was immediately, when I saw on the papers was initiation to conducting, this was definitely something I wanted to do. I had seen so many orchestral concerts in Nice, in Cannes, in Monte Carlo. We have very good orchestras.
Yes.
And we were really a lot at the concerts together. This reminds me of one thing, probably we'll get back later, but this week we played Brahms' first piano concerto. And last year I played Brahms' first piano concerto with my brother in Nice with the Nice Orchestra.
Oh, wow.
And this was really very emotional for both of us and for our family, because we used to listen a lot to Brahms' first piano concerto together in the family, and to attend concerts of the orchestra in Nice where they play Brahms' first piano concerto. So we have all these kind of memories. And indeed, yes, there was so many orchestral concerts that I had attended. And when there was this initiation to conducting, I immediately wanted to do that. And actually, there was an audition with two pianists, and it was Beethoven's 7th Symphony. Then I was admitted to this initiation class. And so 1 month later, I had just turned 14. I was in front of the full orchestra. I mean,
wow.
50 players for Beethoven 7, but with orchestra at the time. And I'd never conducted in my life. And so it was very scary.
I think along with a Czech conductor called Jiří Roženia, who I spoke to many episodes ago, you're about the youngest person to have conducted orchestral forces or anybody at that age. Who was teaching you there at the Conservatoire in Paris?
She was Claire Levaché, teacher of the initiation to conducting. And then I entered the main conducting class from Zolt Neusch.
Yeah.
So we had 4 sessions with the main teacher, with Zolt, and 4 sessions with guest conductors. Yeah. And the course was 4 years. So we got to see a lot of repertoire with a lot of conductors. And it was very nice to get really their advice on all the repertoire. We have seen really a lot of repertoire, because basically there was 8 programs every year for 4 years, so 32 programs. So when I plus the two years in the initiation to conducting. So when I finished when I got my diploma, and every student in conducting class in Paris who gets the diploma gets already a lot of repertoire in hand, and that was very helpful for the future.
I always ask this with a name I don't know, a conducting teaching name I don't know, and Zsolt Neusch, is that how you pronounce it? Hungarian name, I'm guessing, is a name that's not come up before. So what I always ask is, what sort of teacher was he? Was he somebody who was very much based on stick technique and gesture, and less so on score study? Or was he like the Swarovski school, very much based on score study and not very much to do with technique? Or was it a 50-50 whole approach?
Exactly, it was all of that. Definitely, we needed to know the score very well, and to have a very strong technique, very clear technique. It was very tough about being really precise and to have very clear gesture. Yeah. And again, this was very helpful when I then, after Besançon competition, I went quite soon to the US. Sometimes there is not much rehearsal time, like actually in the UK, there are not much rehearsal time. They need a precise conductor.
Yes.
And of course, the musicality is very important. Yeah. But musicality alone, without the technique, is not good.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes, for those who don't live in the UK or don't work in America, where I've never worked, so I don't know to what extent it's like the UK, but sometimes you can do a whole concert on just a 3-hour rehearsal. And whilst it would be nice to stop and chat to the orchestra and tell them things, there are times when you just have to be able to do it with a gesture or a look or a smile or a nod or a wink at a player, as if to say, yeah, you know and I know, and that's what we want. And there is not time to stop and discuss everything. And so you do need a clear technique. So it sounds like next week the LPO are going to get a piece you love with a clear technique. Well, it's a win-win situation.
Tomorrow, actually, it starts tomorrow.
Tomorrow.
So I'm really excited. Yeah.
Going back to Jolt and teaching and whatever else, you also said that you were meeting guest conductors. I've asked this quite a lot recently. I would imagine, if I look at my own life, and I was taught by the same violin teacher for 4 years, but then you had masterclasses with other people, and you took things from them, and then you discarded other. So when you were chatting to the guest conductors, were you always thinking, what can I add? How can I add it? Or you would watch somebody rehearse and think, yeah, I understand why they're rehearsing like that, but that's not for me. That's not my way. How difficult or easy did you find it to add things to what Jolt was teaching you?
Actually, there were conductors, but I meant there were guest teachers.
Oh, I see.
So they would come and teach us actually for 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So 1 week was called work at the table. So basically only with the students and the score. We were around between 10 to 12 students, and the lessons were the 4 years together. So when I entered my first year, I was together with students who were already in the 4th year getting the diploma. So we were always all together. It was a very nice period, very nice atmosphere. And usually, of course, when there is a guest teacher, the first day he arrives in the class, we know already each other and the guest teacher. So we were all looking a bit together at the score, and then getting the advice from the teacher. And then when we entered the second week with the teacher, with the orchestra, of course, we all knew each other much better. And of course, all the teachers were all different. And it was the same then later on when I was assistant in Los Angeles. I was assistant to the music directors, to Esa-Pekka Salonen and Gustavo Dudamel, but also to all the guest conductors. And I was always learning something from them, definitely.
Well, we're going to come to LA Phil very soon. I've got a couple of questions about your time there. But you did mention that you took part in the Besançon competition in 2005 and won. I've had other winners of the Besançon competition on the podcast. And to me, I think the most important thing about that competition is the fact that you get a year with a mentor in the management world after winning, or at least Jonathan Hayward did. Was that part of the prize when you won as well?
But the thing is that I didn't really need that because I immediately signed with a great manager actually, and of course then we were always in discussion. Definitely, yes. From the very first moment, the day of the final, I had a facsimile from the manager. Yeah.
Well, that's good.
So and then I signed and I had immediately also advices because it was a big company, Asconas Holt. And they know exactly what they do.
So that must have really helped on the day of the final. If you've got a letter or a fax from Asconas Holt saying, "Would you like to come and join us?" Was that just before the final? So you knew that was happening, whether you won or not.
There were actually several agencies the same morning. So. It was a busy week.
Yeah, you can go into that final and it's almost a win-win because at that stage of your career, every young conductor is looking for representation. They're looking for an agent or a manager. And so you can go into that final thinking, well, I don't need to win to get this. I've got it already, that must have helped. What did you conduct in the final? Can you remember?
Yes. It was La Valse. We had a world premiere from Philippe Fénelon, then a Tchaikovsky Rococo variation with Marc Copé and Ravel La Valse. It was nice to play La Valse with the Orchestre National du Capitole.
Yeah, I bet.
They know very well this repertoire. It was a very busy week.
Yeah.
And now I am with another great agency, Harrison and Powart. And since 1 year and a half, and I'm very, very happy. Again, great managers, they give good advice.
Of course.
it's always very nice.
So after a couple of assistants and associates, then your 6 years in LA with the LA Phil. So you start as assistant, later become associate, and then the first ever resident conductor of the LA Phil. You mentioned it yourself. You formed a relationship with two music directors there. So you saw the end of Esa-Pekka Salonen and the start of Gustavo Dudamel. First of all, let's go to the conductors. How different were they to assist and to be around? Obviously, two very different characters, two greats of the conducting world. But what differences did you get between Esa-Pekka and Gustavo?
Of course, they are very different. What was interesting for me to see at that time, it was really considered as a golden age for the orchestra. For me, it was interesting to see the relationship of a music director when it's the end of the tenure and another music director when it's the beginning of the tenure. And it was very, very good for me to see that. It has been always a very, very special relation with the LA Philharmonic. I've been there now since first time was for the audition in 2006. I was even not 20 years old. So I remember that in a restaurant we wanted to celebrate with the CEO, Deborah Border. We wanted to have a glass of champagne, but they didn't let me in the restaurant because under 21 you can't. So it was quite funny to have suddenly this important position of assistant conductor of a major orchestra and not celebrate with champagne.
Well, you sort of answered one of my standard questions about assistant conducting, which is, were you assistant to the orchestra or were you assistant to the music director? It sounds like you were assistant to both, because you were assistant to the music director and then did the guest conductors in between.
I was assistant to the orchestra.
Yeah.
So it means assisting the music director and spending many weeks with the music director, assisting the guest conductors, and conducting the orchestra. And actually, it was really fantastic because I could conduct the LA Philharmonic very, very often. And there were all the youth people concerts, the family concerts. I had also Hollywood Bowl concerts. I had subscription concerts. And some of the seasons I was conducting them, I counted 40 times.
Wow.
For 40 concerts. Wow. So it's a huge amount of work. And since then, I've been back very regularly as well as a guest conductor. It's always a great joy.
My second question about the LA Phil really is about, and being so young, I would imagine this was important to you, hopefully, is that, if you started working with them and being around them from the age of 20, you did 6 years in a position there, assistant and associate and then resident, and you would have got to know the players of the orchestra. Now, I was a player in the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, and after that we've had assistant conductors similar age that you were, 22, 23, and I think that relationship between the players and the young conductor is so important. The players almost feel like they're catching a conductor at the right time to be able to teach them things from within the orchestra, but also the young conductor has got this incredible, it's like having, all of the encyclopedias of the world in front of you orchestrally. You can ask anybody anything and they should give you great advice. What were the early days like, and how have the players been with you through the time that you were there working with them?
Oh, it was a really, really fantastic time. I mean, I was accompanying the orchestra on tours, and the LA Philharmonic, at that time, they were touring for 3 weeks in a row. And so when we were going to Asia, I would travel to the orchestra. I would sit in the plane for 12 hours near 2 members, and then another flight next to 2 other members, and I meet them for breakfast. So I was really talking actually to everyone. It has been always a love affair, yes. And of course, yes, they would tell me anecdotes about the past, and even about back of the days of Zubin Mehta, and then later on with Giulini. it's an incredible orchestra.
Well, you get that. I had that when I joined the CBSO as a player, that you hear stories from the old days of Hugo Rignold and Fremo and all of this. But then what you also get is that ability to ask somebody something that that you've conducted in rehearsal and it wasn't together, that you might ask their advice. Or you're sitting watching a guest conductor, and one of the players might come up to you in the queue for coffee in the break and say, "You know what he just said then? Don't ever do that, Lionel. That's really bad." They're the sort of things that, as an assistant, you can't buy a book. You can't read this stuff. Nobody can teach you this stuff, can they?
I think that's the best lesson. Yes, to be assistant conductor, because indeed you receive those kind of nice comments and I mean and the daily life. You understand better the daily life of an orchestra, and actually that's why it was a very important for me to go there, because when I won Besançon and I signed with management, and there were really invitations from everywhere, and some of the best orchestras in the world. At 19, I got to conduct Dresden Staatskapelle.
Wow!
And you have to be prepared for that. And so for me, it was a very good time. Instead of accepting all of those invitations, to go to LA, spend many weeks with a great orchestra and get the advice from guest conductors, from music directors, from the musicians, and be in a very warm environment.
Yes.
So I'm very grateful to the team there.
Yeah. I mean, your first music director job with the Orquesta Sinfónica de Castilla y León.
Yes.
In Valladolid, in Spain. I mean, that ran whilst you were there for the 3 years that you were there. That was the same time you were still in LA. So I suppose you could go back and pick Dudamel's brains, or.
And I was also in Britain, still with the Orchestre de Bretagne. So I had the 3 positions.
Yeah.
In 2009, 2010. This was very good time. Yes, and I still go back, of course, to Valladolid.
Yeah,
and to Zurich. I go so I always kept very good relationship with the orchestras.
Yeah, but busy times, and I suppose what I was trying to get at is that was your first music director job, but you still had the ear of Esa-Pekka or the ear of Gustavo Dudamel, and you could go back and say, "Look, I've got this problem in Spain." Did you ever do that and go back and ask their advice?
The great thing is that 2009 was the first season of Gustavo in LA.
Yeah.
And 2009 was my first season as music director in Valladolid. And so always, of course, yes, when I would go back from a week in LA, I would have been very inspired by the work of Gustavo with the orchestra. And that helped me for my work in Valladolid, and actually to start as a music director.
You've just mentioned Zurich, which was the Tonhalle Orchestra, which you were there for 4 years between 2014 and 2018. This is a question I've asked, especially of countries that seem to be vastly different. I mean, it's very difficult not to get into stereotypes here. But if you take your orchestra in Valladolid and then your orchestra in Zurich, were there many differences in the way that they worked and the way that they rehearsed and the way that they played, being one from Spain and one from Switzerland?
Well, of course, yes, the answer is in the question. You take an orchestra from Finland, will be different than in Portugal or in the US or in Japan. Of course. And that's actually a good thing, I think.
Yes.
It's, of course, there is a kind of internationalization.
Yeah.
But still you can recognize, let's take one example. In Spain, there is this famous siesta. Musicians go to take a nap.
Yeah.
In London, not so much. So the break is 1 hour in London. Yeah. For example, you have one rehearsal, 10 to 1, break, and then you start again because maybe the people, they live far, they go to work, they have a small lunch break, afternoon rehearsal, they go back home. In Spain, there is this very for all the country, any job. So rehearsal is from 10 to 1 and then 4 to 7. So you see there is this 3 hours break between the two rehearsals. That's one of the difference, of course. But yes, there is a difference of lifestyle and different for everything then.
Well, I think in London, if you told them that people they were going to do something like 10 till 12 and 4 till 7, they'd probably try and fit in a film session or a recording session in between.
Yes, exactly. They will fill it with more work. Yes,
absolutely, fill it up completely.
But then I must say, actually, when you go to the rehearsal, really to the way of rehearsing, the detail of rehearsal, I don't see any difference in the world. You know, you have the orchestra, you play, let's say, Brahms 1, you are in Tokyo, you are in LA, you are in France. You just start the rehearsal, you know, and then you have players, you play, you hear what the orchestra is giving you, then you start to work, and then you have your rehearsals. Then after 2 or 3 days, or maybe in the UK is a little bit after one or 2 days, then you have the dress rehearsal and first concert. And actually, I find it also very good that doesn't matter in which country, which city you are. It's always, for me, I found it always quite easy to organize my rehearsals, because this is more and more similar. Let's say in Spain, I gave the example of the longer break, but at the end it was 6 hours rehearsals. When I'm in London, you have 6 hours rehearsal in a day as well, and you organize your rehearsal time.
Absolutely. You just mentioned working all over the world. You have a relationship, I think, with the Opera House in your home city of Nice.
Yes.
Yeah. And I see that you're also working in other opera houses. When you forgetting COVID ever existed, before COVID and now after COVID, fingers crossed. When you speak to your managers at Harris and Parrott, do you have a percentage time where you during a year, for instance, where you would say to them, look, I'd like to do 2 operas next year, the rest with symphonic work, and I'd like 2 weeks off to go to the Seychelles for my holiday. Do you have that sort of idea of every year of what you want to do between opera and between symphonic? Because you do conduct both.
I do conduct both. I still conduct more symphonic.
Yeah.
And so symphonic, I find it quite easy to organize because it takes 1 week.
Yes.
And my team, Ed, Lydia, and Megan, they are very good at. I mean, we had a discussion before starting working together, and actually they came to Nice, and we spent really a good time talking. But and again, as it takes only 1 week, it's more easy to organize when you have 52 weeks, you know. Yes. And so you have 1 week work, 1 week off, you know, you have 1 week at home. Now also the schedule is kind of different because sometimes I'm at home in Nice, but I work because I'm with the orchestra there. It's quite easy actually to organize, you know. The schedules are quite long time ahead, 2 or 3 seasons ahead. So simply, let's say one orchestra is asking if I'm free, but I'm already busy, then they try to find another week, and it's quite easy to organize. And you know, it's really week by week, and so we feel some week. I don't conduct 48 weeks season and have four weeks where. So it's actually, you know, you have some weeks where you work, some months where you work more, some months where you work less. Now with COVID, it's totally different. But for instance, I had 2 weeks in Poland in March with the National Orchestra in Katowice. Then I had 2 weeks at home. I have a small baby now with 6 months old. So it was very nice to spend. Thank you. So it was very nice to spend the 2 weeks at home. Then now I have 2 weeks in a row, London and Zurich. Then in May I have I have more free time, and then June I have some weeks with the Opera House in Nice. So but this has been an easy balance to find.
Well, as we all know, conductors, when they go home, are not just sitting at home. I mean, you may well be at home changing nappies and getting to know your young baby, but during that time at home, we'll be learning scores. And every single conductor I've asked this question: when you come to learn a new score, do you have a system? Do you sit at the piano and work things out, or do you sit at your desk? Do you listen to recordings? And also, do you make a lot of markings in your score? Are you a red, blue, and black, or are you just pencil, or do you use no markings at all and commit it all to memory like a genius? How do you do it from start to finish?
I work at the table.
Yeah.
So I have learned at the Paris Conservatoire, and so again it was 2 years initiation, 4 years conducting class, so a total of 6 years. So then it was always the same system. But in the conducting class, we had really a lot of repertoire to learn, and sometimes not a lot of time. And so I realized that any minute is useful when you have your score. So I remember at that time I was sometimes going. Taking the metro, the tube. I had 30 minutes, and sometimes it was crowded, but still I was with my score putting some marking. So then it was only with the pencil. But usually I try. So I have time. Let's say I have 1 week in Nice. I have time. I try to have a routine. So from the morning, I start. I open the score and have my blue and red markings, and my pencil, and then I just start. I read the score. I try to read also maybe a biography of the composer. Then, if it's a contemporary piece, I try to have a connection with the composer, because of course that's the best we can get. I mean,
yes.
when we have Brahms or Beethoven, we can't ask questions. But when we are lucky to have the composer, it's good to. Next week I have a Dalbavie flute concerto. I know very well Marc-André Dalbavie. I've performed his flute concerto several times, and I know him personally. So this is very nice. It's the same when I play with a soloist. You know, we meet before the rehearsal with orchestra. So tomorrow I meet with Stephen 1 hour before the orchestra rehearsal to talk through the piece. And I try, when I decide to program a piece. So first of all, I read a lot of scores in general, even if I'm not conducting them. I try to always discover new scores, and that's how I get to discover pieces like Prokofiev Symphony No. 4 that now I performed. It actually started now several years ago that I had the score and I studied. I thought, will I want to perform it or not? And then when I know it's a yes, then I develop and I go more deeply. But usually much long before I even start to program it.
Yes.
So usually when I program repertoire, I have studied it quite a lot. Then I would say it doesn't matter which color I use, because indeed I've spent so many hours reading the score that the music gets naturally in the head, in the body. So usually when I program a piece, I've spent already many years with it. That's even for the new piece. But then when it's a piece I have done for a long time, let's say Ravel La Valse, I did it at Besançon competition, and even before the Paris Conservatoire. Some of the pieces I've known for almost 20 years now. So, but I always go back to the score.
Yeah.
Always the most important.
You're absolutely right in what you're saying, is that there are some pieces that we discover as conductors out of nowhere, and then you decide, I must conduct this piece. But sometimes it can take, I remember hearing the Korngold Symphony in F sharp for the first time.
I heard about it from a friend, yes.
Yeah, I've got to conduct that piece. I did 5 years later, but the point is that,
Oh,
actually marking and learning the score took me about a year, slowly, but that piece was in my head and I was learning it for 5 years. I mean, that's the sort of build-up time that we often have. Then there are other occasions when you might be asked to jump in with an orchestra next week, and you've got a short 10-minute overture you've never heard in your life, and you've got to suddenly learn that somehow. And learn it. You try and get it as quickly into your brain as possible. And so we do sometimes have two systems of learning, don't we? Sometimes there's the long burn, and then there's the short explosion of learning when you just got to learn it in 48 hours.
Oh, this happened actually in Los Angeles when
Yeah.
I had to step in for conductors. One time it happened actually during the concert.
Yeah, wow.
Gustavo, this I can mention this story because it was even in the newspaper. But so Gustavo was got injured during the concert, and so at the break they told me he can't do the second half, so you have to do it. It was Tchaikovsky 6.
Yeah.
It's a piece everyone knows quite well.
Yes.
But still, that's the kind of situation where you have no time to think, and I just take to put my clothes, my conducting, my suit on and start.
And if you're lucky, your score for Tchaikovsky 6 is in the building. If you're unlucky and you have to use another conductor score, sometimes that can be really. I did a late jump in for Andrus Nelson's on a tour with the CBSO. And I was looking down at these scores and thinking, and conducting music I knew, but looking and thinking, what does that marking mean? What does that great big scribble mean there? Because it was somebody else's score. It's such a private thing, isn't it?
Yeah, I think everyone has their own notation.
Yeah, very much. Well, I didn't understand.
How do you mark? How do you mark?
I use red for everything to do with my hands and arms and tempi. Ritardandi or Cellarandi or how many beats in the bar. I use blue for dynamics and articulations, and I use black for everything else. So that's how I use my scores. And every time I use them, I write other things in, or I find a misprint and I put that in there. So I'm always prepared. It's it's like your Bible that every time you go back to it, you read another chapter and think, oh, I don't remember that, or I didn't spot that.
Yeah.
So I'm quite close to my scores. If I lost any of them, as you can see, they're all sitting behind me on the Zoom.
Yes.
That if I lost any of them, especially pieces that I do a lot, pieces that I love, then I'd be struggling. In fact, I'm going to Glasgow next week to work with some students, and they asked me to look at Mendelssohn 3 for a piano class. I went over there to my scores and discovered my old score of Mendelssohn 3. I must have thrown it away. All I've got is a brand new one. I've got no markings for Mendelssohn 3 at all. And I think, what did you do that for? I've lost it. I don't know what I've done with it. So, it was one of those mornings.
So you have to rewrite.
I have to rewrite. But normally I would transfer. If I get a new score because it's fallen apart, I would transfer it in. That's what I would do. But yeah, they're very precious to me. I know some conductors couldn't care less. They could turn up and just take the score out of the library of the orchestra that they're working with, and they've said so on the podcast. Well, good for them. I wish I could do that, but I can't. I have to have all of my thoughts in my scores, and it works for me, and I'm not ashamed of it. If you're fascinated by how a score is marked up, I've written an article on the subject, showing my own method and explaining how I go about the process of marking and learning a score. You can see this article, as well as other articles, bonus mini-episodes, interviews and videos by subscribing from just £5 a month to my Patreon page. If you decide to pay annually, you can even get a 10% discount over the year and join the discussion all about conductors and conducting at a discounted rate. This is quite a saving if you choose to pay for the highest rate, which includes conducting lessons from myself as part of that package. The details are in the show notes attached to this episode, and it would be great to have more of you subscribing to this ever-growing supporters club. Now, back to my chat with Lionel Bringuier and the all-important 10 questions. Lionel, it's time for the 10 questions, and as usual, I start with, what sound or noise do you love, and what sound or noise do you hate?
I come from Nice. And I love to walk on the Promenade des Anglais and hear the waves. And So I mentioned in the interview before, but now I have a little baby, and I took him the other day to the promenade, and then when he saw the waves, and he was so happy, and so I am as well. That's a noise I love. So sound I don't like so much is cell phone ring.
Yes.
In general, because it doesn't matter where you are, you always hear a ring, a cell phone ringing, and I think it's a bit disturbing. I try to have mine on silent. Actually, mine is always on silent. So.
There's a very famous, well, I don't know what you would call him, entertainer, Stephen Fry in this country, who comedian, presenter, actor. He's very, very famous in the UK and further afield. And he once said, it's the rudest device on the planet, the telephone. Mm-hmm. It's like somebody coming up to you and saying, speak to me now, speak to me now, speak to me now. That's what a phone does. You know, by ringing as it does, that's basically what it's doing is shouting at you to speak to somebody. And it can be very, very jarring. And I wish you all the loveliest days taking your young son into the sea for the first time, and playing on the beach for the first time. I remember
this
it
was
well.
Really fantastic.
Yeah. My children are 18 and 22, but I still remember it very, very, very well.
Oh, that's great.
Well, maybe for question 3, you might fill your 24 hours free with playing with your young son. What would you spend 24 hours free doing?
Well, 24 hours in a row, so then you have to keep busy, and that's exactly what I did with the quarantine. And so reading books and studying scores. Well, in that case, the phone was helpful because I could be in touch with my wife and with my son, with my family, all my family. Well, typically in 24 hours, I would do also some yoga and some exercise. If it's not in quarantine, I love to walk. So to walk, usually any city where I am, I'm walking a lot, and it can be even many hours. I love it.
It's a real joy of what we do when we guest conduct, isn't it? To go to a city. It can be a new city or it can be a city you've been to many times. But to have, we're normally finished by 4 o'clock. In some places like Scandinavia, you're finished by 2 o'clock in Norway or Finland.
Yeah, exactly.
You've got the rest of the day. You can go and have a lovely walk down by a lake or in a park, or it is a real bonus, isn't it?
Yes, and also particularly in the case of after a rehearsal, it can be very, very noisy in a symphony hall, in a concert hall, and in a rehearsal, and particularly if you conduct a loud piece and you rehearse it, it's tiring for everyone, for the ears. If you have a lot of brass percussion in that piece, lots of fortissimo, and I always find it very nice now after a rehearsal to walk and close to nature, and I realized all the cities in the world have always a park or a place to walk, and I find it a very nice balance.
Who would be a favorite conductor of yesteryear?
When I was a student, I used to love Karajan, and also, well, I like, in fact, different styles, and I know sometimes it sounds surprising because it's like, for example, well, I love tennis, and the people either love Federer or Nadal. It has always been like that. You can't like both, and for me, no, I like both, and I even like Djokovic. Same for conductors. In the past, I liked, and they can be as different as Toscanini or Furtwängler. They were genius. Genius, and so I get inspired by all of them. But I would say Karajan, Toscanini, Furtwängler for the past.
Isn't it funny that people you have to be in one camp or another? Why? Why do I have to be a Federer or a Nadal or any sport? Or it's the same in politics. It's the same as, why can't I like both? And it's the same with conductors, and they're 3 brilliant choices. Now, the next question, some people complain about, others don't mind this question. Who would be a favorite current conductor or conductors?
Well, when I was in LA, I can really say that that Esa-Pekka and Gustavo were really an inspiration.
Yeah.
So I learned a lot from them. I liked very much Abado. I like very much Zubin Mehta. I like very much Daniel Barenboim. I like very much Simon Rattle. I used to go to his rehearsals. Actually, whenever I could, my brother Nicola, with whom I played Brahms 1 recently, he lives in Berlin since 20 years, and so I used to go quite a lot. And I went again recently, and I always try to see a rehearsal of Barenboim or I try to write on as many things as I can. The one time I was conducting in Vienna, I was doing my debut with Vienna Symphony, and I attended it was rehearsals of Riccardo Muti with the Vienna Philharmonic. I always like to attend rehearsals of conductors. I mean, we learn so much as young conductor to see all these giants.
But you never stop learning, do you? You know, I enjoy going to rehearsals, other people's rehearsals, younger or older than me, and because you never stop learning. You know, you can hear all sorts of things from the orchestra, but also hear a new way of rehearsing things. Could be a sentence, could be a word, but it could be something that inspires you.
Yeah, definitely.
What is the hardest work you have ever conducted?
I think I would not say now that it's the hardest work, but at that time, it was the very first time I conducted Rite of Spring.
Yes.
I found it extremely difficult to put the music in the head.
Yes.
And actually, to study it, I had studied it already for many years and always get back to the score. But then the first time, first of all, the orchestra is larger than most of repertoire because you have not woodwinds by 2 or 3, but woodwinds by 5. You have many horns, many brass, trumpets, trombones, tuba, percussions, and then you arrive to a point where, okay, you have studied the score, but still now is the first rehearsal of Rite of Spring, and that was, I think, the most stressful. Yes. Then otherwise, there are difficult pieces. I think when you do it for the first time, like Mahler 2. I mean, it's long. There is a lot of different atmosphere to find, plus the meaning of the piece. These are pieces that, yes, when it's the first time. But all the major pieces, when you do it for the first time, you find it difficult. I mean, Beethoven 9, for example, when I was doing for the first time, for many months, I was really thinking of it, and because it can be, what I mean is not only technically, but you want to really give the maximum for the interpretation, for when it's such great music. Yeah. But technically, I would say Rite of Spring.
Well, it's interesting. I vowed that I would only conduct the Rite of Spring for the first time with either a very good amateur orchestra or a conservatoire orchestra, so that I could get to know it. And the first time I did it complete was with the Conservatoire Orchestra in Birmingham. But I was sent a schedule for a CBSO schools concert, and the presenter had chosen the Dance Sacrale to the end of the Rite of Spring, something like the last 5 minutes of music, which for a conductor, if you've never learned it or studied it, I'd played it hundreds of times, but never. So I had 4 weeks to learn the last 5 minutes of the Rite of Spring, and to do it with the CBSO for the first time in a very short 2-hour rehearsal, and then we were doing the concerts. And so that was, exactly as you say, one of the most stressful experiences of my entire life. I got to the end and just went, oh, and the orchestra looked at me and smiled, because I actually had told them exactly what I've just told you and all of the podcast listeners, was that I'd planned to do it quietly, somewhere out the way for the first time. But then I also had a discussion with Louis Longray once, many, many, many years ago, and he seemed to think that Petrouchka was harder to conduct than the Rite of Spring. Maybe he was worried about there's so many tempo relations in Petrouchka compared to the Rite of Spring. So some people obviously don't worry about it. To me, it freaked me out for a whole month before I did it.
Yeah, and many conductors, I heard many conductors saying that Petrouchka is more difficult. I can understand what they mean, because now Rite of Spring, I have done it with several orchestras several times, and it doesn't seem as difficult as it was when I did it the first time. Petrouchka is always difficult because it's always difficult for the orchestra. Rite of Spring, all the orchestras know it so well. And as you mentioned, when you played it 100 times. And I think it's not difficult for any orchestra anymore. Petrouchka is still difficult, and you always need rehearsal time, even with a very good orchestra. But for me, why I find Petrouchka easier is simply that it's one of the first pieces I studied at the Paris Conservatoire, and I also played it in the orchestra, and so simply I know it better, in fact, than Rite of Spring. And there are few pieces like that I know from the conservatoire time, and indeed, really, it's not so difficult anymore, like because I did it back then, and it was really we had even more time to prepare it and to really get the music in the head. And I have few pieces like that.
It makes a big difference, I have to say. I agree. It really does make a big difference. When you've played it before, conducting it seems a lot easier. Don't know why, but it just does.
Yeah, it's true, because also you know what the orchestra, you can anticipate better what will be the difficulties for the players.
When traveling abroad to conduct, what item could you not leave home without?
Well, books, then, that are not music. Yeah, I would take books and running shoes. Yeah, even if I don't, sometimes I run, but sometimes not. But then I walk, let's say, with running shoes. Yeah, and sometimes, because I love tennis, sometimes with my tennis racket, and if there is let's say only morning rehearsal 10 to 1 and all the afternoon free, that can happen, that I would go to a tennis court and take a lesson, or just keep playing, because when I'm in Nice, I play regularly.
What is the one thing you would change about being a conductor?
That's something I always felt, and I always said this also in interviews, but I see myself as a musician among other musicians. And maybe now it's changing a bit, but back in the past, you had always this idea of the kind of dictator, or and so that's something I wanted to change. But so now it has been many years, and I always had a friendly approach, friendly relation with the players, and consider really my egal, and I'm not superior or anything like that. So a musician among other musicians, and for me that's something I would like to see more often. But it's already happening, I think. Now you see this, you see also more younger conductors than before. At the beginning, when I started, there was not many young conductors, and so maybe the approach has been changing, I think.
I think you're right. I think the days of the dictator are gone. And I think things like Me Too and all of these cases of harassment, and I think has finally killed off the dictator as a conductor, or conductors as a dictator. There is still the odd attitude among some players. I met one quite recently, them and us, because I was stood on the podium. He felt that he could argue with me and be aggressive, and my argument is, I'm just here to make music with you this week. I'm not here to show anything or be anything. And I think, as you said, more and more young conductors coming in. I think it's helped. It's helped that situation. I think it's important
And
that people know that we're just here to make music. I'm not here to do anything else.
And if I can add something, we see also a lot more women conductors, and I think that's really fantastic. I was a jury of the first international competition called La Maestra.
Yes, that's right.
To promote women conductors. And all the competition was very high level, and the 3 finalists were very good. And some of them already got position with orchestras, and that's really good.
Yeah, I think the relationships between orchestras and conductors and the other way around is getting healthier and healthier and healthier, and I think that's a good thing. I think, even from the very oldest, who seems a lovely chap, Herbert Blomstedt, right down to the youngest coming out of conservatoires, that we're just musicians who want to make music with other musicians. We just happen to be doing it with a baton in one hand, possibly, maybe. But yeah, brilliant answer. Number 9. What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
This one is difficult because, again, it comes back from all my childhood where I always saw myself as a conductor. So I never thought of something else.
Not even a tennis pro?
Yes, I would have said that, but my level is way too bad.
Oh, well, the point is, I didn't preface it by saying that your answer could be real or fantasy. I mean, in my fantasy days, I wish I was an opening bowler for England as a cricketer, or as I said, football when I was a kid. But that was never going to happen. But still, it's a fantasy that
If I was not conductor, I could have been a professional cellist.
Yes.
I wanted maybe also to. I played at some point, but it was around Besançon, and I was playing a lot of concerts with my brother as chamber music.
Yeah.
So if it can be an answer with music, then yes, cellist, definitely. If I was not conductor, I would have continued. I was in the Paris Conservatoire and playing in orchestras and playing chamber music. And I would have loved to continue as well. Now, with the time I had less time to practice. But I think I will go back to it now. I want to play for my kid, for example, at home. Yeah.
If the world were to end tonight, what would be your choice of final meal and drink?
Spaghetti.
And with the sauce, are you just a plain spaghetti with a bit of tomato sauce?
Spaghetti with some tomato sauce, maybe the amatriciana. Amatriciana is with a little slice of bacon and tomato sauce. Spaghetti al dente and a glass of red wine.
Italian red or any red? French red, surely French red.
French or Italian red.
Okay.
It would be a French, a Bordeaux.
Yeah. Well, it's 5:00 here, so we're heading towards evening meal time. And so you've started. My stomach is rumbling, and so I'm looking forward to going downstairs and seeing what my wife has cooked us for dinner. Maybe you can order it in your. I know you're in an apartment. I was going to say in your hotel. You can make yourself some pasta. It's been wonderful. Thank you for spending the last hour of your quarantine.
No, thanks to you.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. And I hope after this we can get together and over a glass of wine and have another chat.
That would be wonderful. That would be great. Yes.
A Mic on the Podium was devised and produced by Michael Seal, with music by Ben Dawson. Next time, I chat to a conductor who's at the very beginning of her career. She's appeared as a finalist in competitions as both a conductor and a violinist. She's taken part in masterclasses with some of the world's greatest conductors. During the pandemic, she conducted a high-profile jump-in concert with the London Symphony Orchestra, and she's just started as the assistant conductor at the St. Louis Symphony Orchestra in the United States. But until then, bye-bye.